It helps to get off on the right foot with doing the ketogenic diet. Now, there's so much information out there. I thought I'd distill this down into 9 very simple tips that you can utilize to get started on a ketogenic diet the right way. So let's go ahead and let's break them all down and get into the action. The first one is not having so much fat when you first start. It used to be thought that you need to prime the body, get the body adjusted to utilizing fats, all this and that. The more fat that you consume, the more your body is going to learn how to use fat. And to a certain extent, that's true. But when you get started, you're actually better off to keep it relatively low fat. And the reason is because it takes time for the mitochondrial machinery to build up. It takes time for the body to learn how to use a bunch of fats. So at first, if you just load a bunch of fats into your diet, it actually backfires. Okay, you don't have the bile production to digestively deal with that just yet. So it takes a little bit of time in that. If we are constantly loading ourselves with dietary fat, we never get an opportunity to liberate the stored fat and activate the fat adaptation molecules that allow us to get the most out of the ketogenic diet in the first place. So during your first week of keto, keep it relatively high protein and a moderate amount of fat. I would usually say in a macronutrient range of maybe 50% fat, 40% protein, and 10% fibrous carbs. Okay, moving on to the next. Speaking of how much fat you should be having when you're first starting keto, don't worry about your ketone levels. When you're starting keto, everything's going to be thrown out the window anyway. You're going to notice that your ketone levels are extraordinarily high right when you start. If you're using those little urine strips, you're going to notice that you're registering a lot of ketones. But you might get disappointed that 3-4 weeks down the line, that dramatically changes and you don't register any ketones. That's because a lot of times ketones are just measuring your excess amount of ketones, especially in the urine. Now, if you're measuring your blood ketones, it can be a little bit different. It's still important, but at the same time, ketones do not mean fat loss. So you don't automatically increase your amount of fat loss just because you have more ketones. You could pound a bunch of MCT oil, eat a bunch of coconut oil, drink some olive oil, and skyrocket your ketone levels, but it doesn't mean that you're burning fat. It just means you're producing and manufacturing ketones via what's called ketogenesis. So remember that fat loss at the end of the day is going to come from your body using your own fat to create ketones. So don't be afraid if your ketone levels aren't super high. It really doesn't matter. Next one is, don't be freaked out about doing any kind of high intensity exercise. It's not going to break things. It's not going to mess things up. You might find that you end up having a little bit less performance at first, but it's a really important beginner tip to know that you should still go about your training the same way you normally would. Don't try to abruptly change anything. Don't make any drastic changes. Okay, cardio is still going to be best for fat loss. Weight training is still going to be best for building muscle. Okay, and weight training is going to allow your body to become very efficient at using both glucose and fats for fuel. So I see way too many people that just get concerned and they overthink it. Don't overthink it. Go about business as usual, and especially when you're starting keto, maybe do a little bit more of low intensity cardio so you can get your body a little bit more used to oxidizing those fats. The next one, you really don't want to be overly concerned with protein. It's very important that you replenish electrolytes, and I don't necessarily mean you have to sip on an electrolyte product or anything like that. I think it tastes good and it's beneficial, but just by making sure you get enough salt, enough potassium, magnesium in your diet, and don't be afraid of salt. Okay, it's a beginner tip that I wish I knew 10 years ago. Okay, 10 years ago when I was going through my weight loss transformation, I tried to cut a lot of the salt out because back in that day, there wasn't even a lot of delicious keto foods like there are today. So I wouldn't put salt. And then I would realize I'd get fatigued. So the point is, you definitely want to do that. It makes a big difference. Don't be afraid to salt your lemons. Then, diversity of foods and micronutrients matter. They absolutely do. Okay, strict keto should look like a full spectrum, wide variety of foods. Okay, this is unbelievably important for your gut microbiome. As you start a ketogenic diet, you will have a negative shift in your gut microbiome for the first 2 to 3 weeks. Then it rebuilds. And studies have demonstrated after 6 months, a properly crafted ketogenic diet is going to lend itself to a larger amount of different species within your gut. It actually improves gut microbiome diversity later on if you stick with it. Okay, but if you are not getting adequate micronutrients and adequate soluble fiber in and adequate fiber fiber in general, you cannot allow the bacteria within your gut to proliferate. I've talked about this in other videos before, but it is so important that you get enough fiber to allow short chain fatty acid production to occur. I can assure you, at least in personal guarantee with that, is that you will see that your ketone levels improve. It's only going to help you, and lean into the soluble fiber whenever you can, because those short chain fatty acids that it produces can help you deal with glucose better and help you deal with fat better. It's just what you want to do. The next one is you have to commit for a few months when you first start. Okay, there's all this talk about cycling in and out of keto, which I'm a big fan of. Okay, but you have to commit for a few months first before you can really embark on that kind of stuff. Okay, if you just jump in and start doing keto cycling, you're not going to have the fat adaptation yet to allow yourself to really process both fuels properly. Your body's preferentially going to want to use glucose, so it's going to keep jumping back to glucose. You have to give yourself enough period of time to get fat adapted. And that usually takes, 2 to 3. So that ends up being anywhere from 5 to 10 weeks before you're fully fat adapted. That's when you can start messing around with adding carbs into the mix. So don't jump into it too early. But my point in saying that is you have to give it the GI try for 60 or 90 days. You just have to, because that's when the benefits start kicking in. There is an absolute period where you might feel like dog crud as you're getting adjusted. You'll be fine. The next tip you need to know, and this is something that's real, do not schedule your cheat meals. Seriously, it messes you up and it creates an emotional attachment to your cheat meal. Okay, I was 100 pounds, like 110 pounds overweight before. Cheat meals are okay. Okay, but when you start scheduling them, you create this emotional relationship with them. Okay, and you want to make sure that you are not just establishing this consistent reminder that it's okay to reward yourself with food. It is okay to reward yourself with food, but you don't want to have that ingrained in your mind. Okay, have a cheat meal and make it count. Okay, make it something that's going to actually be worthwhile, but make it kind of impromptu. You don't want to sit there and you don't want to think about what your cheat meal is going to be sometimes. Sometimes it's better just to let it be a random thing that you consume.